Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Civic Engagement 101, part of the Training Institute for Tenants and Residents. My name is D. Ross, and I proudly serve as the Tenant Leader Fellow with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And it's truly an honor to be your host for today's session. We're excited to continue into the second trimester of our Training Institute series. And just a reminder, we're still in our soft launch phase, which means your participation and presence in these sessions are helping us shape the future of this space. Whether this is your first time joining us or if you've been with us since the beginning, welcome. You belong here. So to go on to the next slide, to talk about today's agenda, I'm gonna do a brief overview of the Training Institute. Then we're gonna welcome our dynamic special guest speakers, uh, and we have Tia and state partners here today, and they're going to be talking about best practices, different things that they are seeing across the country, and also best strategies that they have proven worked in their own areas. So before we begin, I want to share a little bit about the Training Institute. This is a national initiative rooted in education, empowerment, and organizing. We exist to build the leadership and capacity of renters and tenant leaders, especially those most impacted the most by housing injustice. Whether it's civic engagement, disaster recovery, communications, or grassroots organizing, our goal is to equip you with the tools and knowledge to lead boldly and drive change in your communities. We're grateful you are here. Let's dive in and get started. Tia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dee, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tia Turner, and I serve as the project manager of our Homes Our Votes campaign. Our Homes Our Votes campaign is the National Low Income Housing Coalition's nonpartisan initiative that seeks to close the voter turnout gap between low income renters and high income homeowners and to elevate housing as an election issue at every level of government. Our campaign works to ensure that every renter's voice counts, and because housing justice and democracy go hand in hand. Before we dive into today's training, I want to take the moment to ground us in what and why this next issue that we're going to discuss is really important. Our advocacy, as we all know, doesn't happen in isolation, and it's deeply connected to the broader fight for fair representation and equal access to democracy. And the decisions made in our courts, especially those interpreting the Voting Rights Act, directly affect whether the communities most impacted by housing instability have a voice in shaping the policies that govern their lives. That's why today's discussion on the Supreme Court is the case around the Voting Rights Act is so critical. This case isn't just about lines on a map or redistricting. It's about power, voice, and the protection of communities that have long been underrepresented, including low-income renters and people of color. To help us unpack what's at stake, I'm honored to have Ajay with the Southern Poverty's Law Center Democracy Voting Rights Litigation Team. Ajay is a senior staff attorney. And Ajay, I'm going to hand it over to you to briefly let us know what's going on with this case and the implications for how it will impact voters and what this means for the future of civic participation in our communities.
Great. Well, thank you, Tia. I appreciate you I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group about the Voting Rights Act and the Supreme Court case. As the slide says up front, we're talking about a case called Louisiana v. Calais. This case is really rooted in the way that the state of Louisiana redistricted in 2020. Following the census, Louisiana got 6 seats in the Congressional House of Representatives. The Louisiana legislature subsequently drew a map for those 6 seats. And in that map, it included one majority Black district. But the population of Louisiana is about 1/3 Black. So there were many out there, many advocates who were arguing that there was, in fact, room to draw a second majority Black district. And a group of Black voters represented by civil rights organizations filed a lawsuit challenging Louisiana's map following in 2021, I believe it was, and arguing that it violated the Voting Rights Act. Now, just a little primer on what the Voting Rights Act is. It's a statute that was passed in 1965, and it prohibits practices and procedures that result, and this is the direct language from the statute, that result in the denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race or color. What does that mean? It means that, for many, many, many years in the United States, jurisdictions all across the country were looking for ways to deny communities of color their right to vote. And this was a statute that was passed in 1965 in the midst of the civil rights movement to enforce the constitutional protections for the right to vote for communities of color across the country. For decades, it has been used to address redistricting where communities of color have been deprived of equal representation. So the question we often ask in a Voting Rights Act case is, does the way that this particular state redistricted deprive Black voters in that state of their ability to elect candidates that they prefer? One other way to think about this is, even if a Black voter can vote, even if they are able to get to that poll site and cast a ballot, if the district they are voting in is structured in a way that prevents them from ever having the chance to actually elect a candidate, then their right is effectively being violated. The VRA has been a really effective tool for ensuring that state legislatures across the country draw districts where Black and brown communities have been able to elect candidates they prefer. And in fact, in this Louisiana case, the Black voters were ultimately successful in creating a second majority Black district. Louisiana went to go draw that district, considering the decision that had been made, and ultimately drew a second majority Black district that stretched from Baton Rouge all the way to Shreveport. It's a little bit of an awkward drawing. We think that they did that on purpose as a way to invite lawsuits to challenge the Voting Rights Act. In fact, there were a lot of other ways they could have drawn the map that would have been, I think, more reasonable and compact. But that's ultimately how we ended up where we did. Sure enough, a group of white voters in Louisiana filed a lawsuit and argued that the Constitution actually prevents legislatures from using race as a predominant factor when redistricting. So in other words, they argued that the legislature, by trying to intentionally draw a majority Black district, was violating the Constitution's requirement to avoid using race in redistricting. That case ultimately made its way to the Supreme Court, and the court has been tasked with determining how to deal with two kind of conflicting issues, one of which is the Voting Rights Act requires states to ensure that they are not diluting minority votes. And on the other hand, the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution prohibits the use of race as a predominant factor in redistricting. So how do you sort of balance those two issues? Now, there's a lot of kind of technical legal jurisprudence that's involved here that about timing and intent versus effect. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about this stuff. I think ultimately it's worth just noting that the court is going to make a decision about whether or not a legislator can use race when redistricting and to what extent they can use race to redistrict. And there's a good chance that they may ultimately either restrict or overturn the Voting Rights Act. And I think it's really important to go from there to talk a little bit about the impact, because it would be a truly monumental decision if they were to go forward with that. Just on the at the outset, just to note, the Voting Rights Act, as far as it applies to state legislatures. It applies within states to it applies to congressional seats in the federal level and the House of Representatives. It applies to state legislatures, and within states, it applies to municipalities. So county commissions, school boards, city councils, they are all subject to this requirement. And so, at the high level, when we're talking about congressional seats, I'm sure some of you have seen out there that there are something close to 19 House seats that have been categorized as Voting Rights Act seats, majority minority seats that have been drawn pursuant to the Voting Rights Act. That's really just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think you could see potentially redrawing of districts all across states in the South and within states in the South, and across the country. You can see, I think, massive changes to the way districts have been drawn across municipalities, counties, and so forth. So the issues there, I think, really come down to questions about representation and what that means for civic engagement, as Tia had sort of alluded to at the beginning of this conversation. The Voting Rights Act was one of our kind of most effective tools for ensuring that concentrated communities of color could elect candidates they prefer, candidates who would be responsive ultimately to their concerns, their values, their interests. Without the VRA, we are in a world where legislatures could effectively crack those communities into separate districts to dilute their voting strength and make it nearly impossible for them to elect candidates that they prefer. Some of the potential real world impacts from that, you can go down the list: non-responsiveness of electoral officials, right? It's fairly likely that an elected official would be less likely to prioritize issues of communities that didn't vote for that person, or that they don't need to be able to be elected. It could result in deprioritization of issues, in specifically for issues involving renters. It could in deprioritization of issues like affordable housing, tenant protection, social safety nets within a particular city or a municipality. There is research out there that shows that majority minority districts in cities like Houston, Atlanta, New Orleans had correlated to higher investment in housing programs and local tenant protections. And so we can kind of work our way back from that to see, what might happen if one of those jurisdictions decides to redraw the map in a way that doesn't sort of provide for those types of districts. The other kinds of related piece of this is just resource allocation. You can sort of imagine how this might impact how elected officials dispense resources within a particular jurisdiction, how this might impact road maintenance, how this might impact local schools and how they are resourced, parks and facilities, the location of hazardous sites and industrial sites. All of these things could ultimately be impacted by these representational issues. And then on the civic engagement piece, I think one piece of this that we're worried about is really getting us worried about, within communities that ultimately have their vote diluted, whether there will be sort of a developing sense of fatalism, of, kind of why bother, right? If the candidate that you support isn't going to win from the district that you're in, then why vote? If the system is rigged, why bother? That kind of attitude, I think, can really result in steep declines in voter turnout, in voter registration and voter turnout. It can result in less trust in officials and institutions. It's really a troubling set of consequences. And I don't mean to paint a really grim picture here, but I do think this is one of those fundamental laws for ensuring an equitable and fair democracy across the country. And I am truly worried about the impacts here. If this is to be either restricted and drawn back or fully overturned. So with that, I think I'm at time, so I will yield the floor from there. But I'm sorry to end on such a dour note.
Thank you so much, Ajay, for breaking that down so clearly and helping us understand how these legal decisions ripple through our communities and shape the fight for for housing justice. It's a powerful reminder that the right to vote and the right to a safe, affordable home are deeply intertwined, both being essential to ensuring our voices are needed and are represented. And so as we continue to move forward within our nonpartisan campaign here at NLIHC as our homes, our votes, we'll continue to track this issue, continue to keep our partners and affiliates all up to date on what's going on and potential advocacy efforts that we'll take around this issue. So thank you again for joining us, Ajay. And we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll get into a little bit about some of the work that we're currently doing here at the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign under NLIHC. And so I just want to take a moment to uplift some of the incredible work happening on the ground through our pilot communities. We know that renters, especially low-income renters, are severely underrepresented in the political process. And in the 2024 general election, you can go to the next slide, please. 52.1% of eligible voters voted, compared to 70.3% of eligible homeowners. And when we look at income, the gap is even greater. Only 46% of eligible voters in households making below 20,000 voted, compared to 78.4% of those earning $100,000 and above. While roughly 1/3 of Americans rent their homes, researchers estimate that renters make up only 2 to 7% of elected officials across all of our levels of government. This imbalance has real consequences when renters vote at lower rates. Elected officials, as you heard Ajay mention earlier, elected officials are less likely to view them as a constituency with power, meaning that the policies and priorities that impact renters often go unheard. To change that, Our Homes, Our Votes launched the Pilot Communities Initiative in 2024 to build our field's capacity to engage low-income renters throughout every step of the electoral process, from registration to education to mobilization. We partner with housing providers, local advocates to test strategies that share lessons and understand the impact of nonpartisan voter engagement efforts on the ground. 5 of NLIHC's state and tribal partners with a strong track record of civic engagement were selected, which was the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, Housing Network of Rhode Island, Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing, and Georgia Advancing Communities Together, and the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. Each received grant funding, technical assistance, and tailored resources to support voter registration, education, and mobilization efforts in their communities. And in 2025, we proudly expanded the initiative to include Prosperity Indiana, further strengthening our collective impact. This work has generated powerful insights about housing and homelessness, and organizations can build, and how organizations can build civic power, foster leadership amongst renters, and connect voting directly to the policies that shape people's lives. With that in mind, we're going to shift gears, and hopefully you'll be encouraged listening to some of the work that our pilot communities carried out. And we're going to have next Dr. Bambie with Georgia Act to talk about some of the lessons learned in Georgia that they carried out as they did their voter engagement and voter education efforts. And Dr. Bambie Hayes Brown, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tia. I am Dr. Bambie Hayes Brown. I serve as President and CEO of Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia Act, and we're a statewide nonprofit affordable housing and community development membership organization. We are based in Atlanta, but we do work throughout the state of Georgia. And I am also a person with lived experience of housing insecurity and a former public housing resident. So I bring all of my personal experience into this space when I talk about voter engagement, especially in low income communities. So in 2024, the first thing that I did was become a deputy registrar here in the state of Georgia in two counties, Fulton County and Clayton County. And that is something that I think should be highlighted if it's offered in your state as a best practice, because that gives you all the tools and all the information that you need to hold voter engagement, voter registration activities that adhere with the laws in your state. Because we know previously here in Georgia, they did pass what they call an Election Integrity Act of 2021, also known as Senate Bill 202, that really harmed a lot of the work that nonprofits did to help people go out to vote. So it's very important to take advantage of any trainings that you may have to become a deputy registrar. So some of the activities that we did was we partnered with the National Low Income Housing Coalition's Housing Council, which comprised of different apartment complexes that provide low income housing. So it may be a low income housing tax credit partner or other type of partner. And we partnered with one particular complex, the Park at Mount Zion in Jonesboro, Georgia. And we worked with the staff that was on site to provide some what we call resident services, because all of those apartment communities need to provide some type of resident services. And so we were able to step in and offer a voter engagement event where we were able to register voters. We were also able to help voters who did not have an ID to vote in order to get their ID. In Georgia, we have a voter ID, but that's all you could do with that ID is vote. But we wanted people to have an actual Georgia ID where they could use that not only to vote, but for also to sign up or get other programs and services. And so we explained to the apartment complexes that our purpose was to educate and inform voters, not to quote unquote complain about the apartment complex. That was something that we saw that came up a few times as we were looking to apartment complexes, but we were there to encourage them to say, hey, we are here as a partner, not as an adversary, in order to bring information to people. We also held candidate forums, and we held a candidate forum in the Pittsburgh community in the city of Atlanta, and we did it a little bit different. So we didn't have just candidates coming out and just speaking to people, so people are just sitting there watching these talking heads. They did give a 2 to 3 minute opening speech, but then they had to go back to their stations and actually engage with people around the room. So they had to talk with their constituents and people one-on-one. We also partnered with other community groups in the Pittsburgh area. That's Pittsburgh in the city of Atlanta, not Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so we actually did canvassing. So passing out flyers, passing out information, getting people out to vote getting people out to the candidate forum, and also registering people to vote. And again, helping with that ID assistance with the partnership with Vote Writers. So it's very important to build those partnerships, such as Vote Writers, Vote ER, and those other entities in your local communities. Because when you're a small staff like us of only 3 people, we cannot do this alone. We really, really depend on those partnerships. And we also partnered with the Atlanta University Center and HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and we piggybacked on activities that they were already doing. Guess what? Coming up to homecoming. So we know that homecoming brings out a lot of people. It brings out the crowds. It brings out fraternities, sororities, and other student organizations. So we were able to piggyback on what was already established and set up those what we call pop-up tables in order to register people to vote. And then we've also done some voter engagement training and we did that virtual, in person, and virtually in rural communities, as well as our larger metro Atlanta areas. So again, it's about thinking outside of the box. Some things you may do in person, some things you may do virtually, some things you may piggyback on what other organizations are doing, especially if you are a small organization trying to do this work statewide. And also, don't forget your social media. So what we did was we hired 2 bright interns, and they were able to provide social media posts that were thought provoking, that were engaging. And so we use all of the social media platforms, including TikTok. So I learned how to use TikTok and how to make videos so that we encourage younger people out to vote as well. But it doesn't stop there. Voter registration is just the first part. We also have to mobilize people to vote. So we have to get the information out, and that's what we did about rides to the polls. And so there were various groups like the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda that provide rides to the polls where people can sign up and get that done. Also working with your faith-based institutions and churches in your communities to transport people to the polls. And then I'm going to go back just a little bit. We didn't do it in 2024, but we did do it in the past where we partnered with local school districts in registering those 17 and a half year olds to vote. And on voting day, we were able to partner with the schools, and the schools provided transportation for the new voters, the first time voters, to actually go in and vote. And then lastly, I will end with this. We cannot forget our returning citizens, because we have, as going out doing this work, we hear time and time again where people are saying, hey, I have a record, I can't vote. And so it's important to know, again, the importance of being a deputy registrar in your state. If you're doing this work, what are your state's regulations and rules regarding restoration of voting rights? So in Georgia, we have the Georgia Justice Project, that we have partnered with to get that information out about how people can restore their voting rights. And also another thing that we have done in the past, and partner with the NAACP DeKalb, was actually go into the jails and register people to vote, because many people may be in jail, maybe for we understand that some people may be falsely accused, or people may be waiting to hear from a judge, but that does not necessarily bar them from voting. And so it's important to understand and think outside of the box when we're looking at voter registration and getting those votes and having a plan to vote, whether you're going to do it in person, whether you're going to do mail-in ballot. All those things are important, including the timelines that you have to get those things done. And then I will end with this. Something that we've done before in the rural communities, and I always like to bring this up, and people always get a chuckle, is that we have worked with funeral homes. So guess what? Funeral homes have limousines. And so those limousines can hold quite a few people. So I promise you, it will not be your last ride, but it can be a ride to the polls for you if you are in those small communities that may not have the um, the Uber or the Lyft. We understand that those don't go into all communities, but thinking outside of the box, your churches, your funeral homes, your school systems, in order to get people to the polls to vote. So thank you so much, Tia, and I'll be glad to answer any questions when that time comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bambie, for joining us and letting us know all of the creative ways that you all had to really mobilize voters. Next, we're gonna move on to Katie West with Housing Network of Rhode Island. Katie, I'm gonna pass the floor to you and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Tia. Grateful to be here with everybody. I have a lot of, I think, similar reflections to Dr. Bambie, which is affirming for me because I think Dr. Bambie and Georgia Act do amazing work. So I'll talk about what we did in Rhode Island. Do I have slides or not? It's okay if I don't.
You do, Katie. Next slide.
Okay, next slide. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. This is just about who we are. You can go to the next slide. Some of the things that we did in 2024 to engage renters where we partnered so that the Housing Network, we are a membership organization. We have 20 nonprofit affordable housing developers, and we also staff a coalition of about 80 plus organizations who care about housing and participate in housing advocacy with us. So we reached out to affordable housing members and partners to encourage them to work with us in order for us to do civic engagement with their residents. Some of those affordable housing providers have resident service coordinators, so folks who are their job is to help residents navigate services. And we did a training with those RSCs so they would be up to date on our voter regulations in Rhode Island and be able to help people register, etc. We partnered with a mobile outreach service called Shower to Empower, which provides a mobile shower, case management, and outreach services to reach folks who are unhoused. And we went to about 5 communities with them and spoke to people who were accessing the site. We're looking forward to doing that again in 2026. We did a lot of tabling. Some of the highlights of events we did were back to school events where we were reaching a lot of families. And for National Voter Registration Day, we staffed up a table at our state's major transit hub called Kennedy Plaza. So there's just a lot of people moving in and out of that space where we were able to get their attention and talk to them about voting. From May to November of that year, we did canvassing with renters. So we made phone calls and we knocked on doors. We recruited volunteers from universities around Rhode Island to help us do that because we also only have 3 staff, and partnerships were also super helpful. If you could go to the next slide. Rhode Island in 2024, we had a housing bond question on the ballot. So there was a question on our state ballot, question 3, that was, do you support a $120 million to be dedicated to affordable housing? So we used that campaign as an issue and a talking point with voters to speak to let people know about, first of all, your ballot doesn't just have candidates on it. It often has state questions and local questions. So it was an opportunity to talk to people about issues. And not just, we are nonpartisan, so we don't talk about candidates, but we were able to talk to people about supporting affordable housing. We did voter pledge drive. So what that means is folks would sign a pledge that they committed to vote, and then we'd follow up with them before Election Day to make sure they had information. We did a ice cream social event. We did a get out the vote push that was 2 days before election, where we knocked on 300 doors in one apartment complex right before election day. And then we did a social media campaign with some key partners to talk about different voting populations. I won't play the video, but the video there is one of our partners at the Latino Policy Institute. It's in Spanish. And so Marcela, who's the director of that organization, was uplifting that in Rhode Island in 5 communities you can access a Spanish language ballot. If you don't live in one of those 5 communities, you can ask a trusted person to help you vote if you are unable to read or write in English. So that was important to us. All of our materials were in English and Spanish. Next slide. I think the reflections, again, echoing some of things that Dr. Bambie stated, were for us, we found preparation was just important to know if we were going out to door knock and canvas, where we were going and where we were, what communities we would be knocking doors in. We did focus on 5 communities in Rhode Island that had a high population of renters and historically lower voter turnout. We had scripts so that our staff and volunteers had something to follow when they were engaging with people on the doors. We had materials to leave behind, both when we were canvassing or tabling. Asking questions. I saw some comments about folks feeling like their vote doesn't matter. That's very real. And so one thing that we trained our staff and volunteers to do was to ask people, about what issues they cared about and engage them in a conversation. As a nonprofit, we cannot be partisan, so that was important just to make sure people were educated on. We also had access to getting a voter list. A lot of it varies by state, but often your Secretary of State's office may be able to provide a voter list for a fee. But we had access to it through National Low Income Housing Coalition, which was super helpful. Accessibility, again, thinking about language and access for people with disabilities, knowing our state voter laws and how they applied for folks in different situations so we could educate people. Partnering with community-based organizations, peer leadership. So we had, residents that we engage with who were very passionate about civic engagement. Sometimes those were staff working in affordable housing development. Sometimes it was residents we were connected to through other work that we're doing. So engaging those folks to talk to their communities about voting, and then just getting feedback from people in the moment about what we could do to, better outreach and connect with folks. And then the last slide is just my contact information.
Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing all the amazing work that you all had carried out in Rhode Island. We can go to the next slide. And with that information, we have released a best practice report, turning renters to voters, lessons in engaging low-income communities, where we collectively, with all of our pilot community partners, work to put all of what they had carried out, all of the lessons learned, into this report. Our intern Brandon is going to drop the report in the chat so that you all can have access to that report, so that you can take some of the lessons learned and carry out the same work within your communities. Next slide, please. And then we're just going to briefly breeze over some information that we have. These are a few of the building blocks of a nonpartisan voter engagement campaign. If you're fairly new to this world, you want to make sure that you're starting with voter registration, checking people's registration. Make sure that you go to your election office sites to know the laws that are in place in order to engage voters. You want to make sure that you're compliant with that, and especially with your 501c3 status, if that's the work, if you have a 501c3, and then you want to carry out voter education and candidate engagement work. voter mobilization, and voter protection. These are all some of the building blocks to a successful voter engagement strategy. We can go to the next slide, and these slides will be made available. We'll put it out in our connection and memo. But just briefly, our Homes, Our Votes, we have a plethora of resources, many of which our pilot communities used on our website to really know and understand how to engage voters, what you can and cannot do, what it means to remain nonpartisan. All of those materials you can find on our website at the link that our intern is going to drop in the chat. And again, our best practice report will also be in the chat. In 2026, we'll be kicking off our webinar series, and just want you to stay tuned. We're really excited. We know and understand the times that we're in. So we're hoping to be able to equip you all with all of the necessary tools and resources that you're gonna need to really do this voter engagement work. Next slide, please. And if you would like to partner with our Homes, Our Votes, we do have referral links for Turbo Vote, which is a platform that we use and that our partners use to check voter registration. It also helps you to it also helps voters understand what's coming up and what's going to be on their ballots. It sends out election reminders, and if this is something that you are curious in, definitely consider becoming an affiliate of our Homes, Our Votes program. Next slide, please. And I am really, really proud to announce that our Homes, Our Votes launched a mini grant program that anyone is able to apply if you're nonpartisan and if you have a 501c3 or have a fiscal sponsor. Our application deadline is November 7th, and this grant is really meant to help mobilize nonpartisan activities that empower low-income renters and or people experiencing homelessness to participate in the democratic process. Funds can be used to support immediate nonpartisan voter mobilization activities for state and local elections in 2026 and or voter registration and education initiatives for participation in the 2026 midterm elections. If you take a quick picture of the QR code, and our intern Brandon is going to drop the information in the chat for the actual grant. Like I said, the application deadline is November 7th, and you are welcome to apply. We're granting up to $1,500 for voter engagement activities. And next slide, please. And if you would like to join and be an affiliate, it's open to all nonpartisan organizations that share our campaign goals. We'll have regular office hours, email. We have an email listserv and post-election virtual gatherings. As I mentioned, also Turbo Vote referral code, and you can sign up at the link that our intern will drop in the chat. And then you all probably heard about our Housing Providers Council, which Dr. Bambie mentioned earlier. It is open to all nonpartisan groups of housing developers, property managers, and resident service staff committed to boosting voter turnout and amongst their residents. And so you're able to join and get connected. If you become an affiliate, you can get connected to this group as well. And then next slide, please. And then we also have voter swag. Next slide. Yeah, so we also have voter swag that is available that you can find here at the link. If you're interested, we'll be updating all of our swag that will reflect the 2026 elections. And our last slide, if you have any questions about the mini grant applications, any questions about our Homes, Our Votes, email me at tturner@nlihc.org, and I'll pass it over to Dee.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can we give her a round of applause for our amazing speakers today. And at this time, we're going to do a quick Q&A. There are some questions in the chat for you guys. I don't know if you guys can see them, but one question comes from Samantha. Um, and I think this is geared towards Dr. Bambie. Have you used that funerals as making sure ballots aren't going out where are not needed anymore?
Yes, I think the question clarified was there any funeral home data that we could use to make sure that we're not that ballots or information is not sent out to those who are deceased. We don't do that here internally at Georgia Act. But what we do monitor is we monitor the purged rolls. So in Georgia recently, there were over 477,000 Georgians that were purged from the rolls. And the first thing I did was get that list and started contacting our partners because we are a membership organization. So we have partners throughout the state of Georgia in those counties and provide that information to them to make sure that people get re-engaged and to re-register to vote. So that's why it's important to vote in every single election. If I'm not mistaken, if you don't vote in 2 presidential election cycles, you can be purged from the voter rolls here in Georgia. So as we say, there are no off years as it relates to voting. We're actually doing voter engagement work for local elections that's coming up on next week. The last day of early voting here in Georgia is tomorrow, with election day on November the 4th. So we receive that information from the Secretary of State of people who have been purged from the voting rolls.
Thank you, Dr. Bambi. Another question comes from Lisa. Is that 866-hour vote a number for all states to use?
Yes, but as Dr. Bambi mentioned, make sure that you check all information on your election office site. You'll be able to know all of the information that you need to be able to, as it relates to voter protection. But most states can use the 866 voter protection line.
And then another question coming in. Can I get free flyers about voting and how to register, as well as for the homeless?
Yeah, so we have a plethora of digital assets on our site. And if Brandon, if you could drop that information in the chat again on how they can access that information, you can utilize those assets to be able to carry out your work.
Perfect. The last question we'll take, is there a part of engagement that does more education on how to vote, like the process, what to expect the day of, where you go, how to use the machines, or using the paper ballot? Sometimes I feel newer voters are a bit intimidated about what to expect, etc.
Absolutely. So in 2026, when we kick off our webinar series, we'll have a number of trainings that you all can participate in on how you can educate voters on the actual process of voting. And so we'll do a lot of that training next year. And so definitely stay tuned for the information coming up in 2026. We'll have a number of trainers from across the country joining us, and you'll learn a plethora of information from them.
Yes, and we do that as a part of our training, whether it's virtual or in person, because with the advent of SB 202, there were a lot of changes. And so there were changes as to dates, dates of registration, what happens in a runoff, which we anticipate there will be a lot of runoffs in our local elections around the state of Georgia. So we have sample ballots. We go through that entire process. So that's a part of the process of having having a plan to vote, and also knowing where to go, what time you can drop off a ballot if you need to put it in a drop box, because all of that varies by county. And so that's why it's important to be trained on what is going on in your state. And I could definitely say has been a great benefit of being a deputy registrar, voter registrar here in the state of Georgia.
Yes, I would agree with all of that. Knowing your state or county jurisdictions, voter laws are very important. And if your Secretary of State has that information, that they can be a good resource, as well as community organizations that do voter engagement. We work with our Secretary of State's office. We're fortunate in Rhode Island to have a very active Secretary of State, and they come out and they do trainings, and they actually also will bring the ballot, the machines, and have sample ballots so that folks can practice and understand that process. We also do a lot of, Rhode Island has early voting up to 20 days before the election, and so we make sure to let people know that that is an option because of the transportation barriers that are very real, and sometimes folks can't get to the polls on election day. So making sure people know all the methods that they can vote by mail, early voting, in person, all of that.
Well, thank you all once again for joining us for Civic Engagement 101. And a huge thank you to our incredible speakers for sharing their knowledge and passion with us today. Can we take a second to give them a virtual round of applause? You can put it in the chat. If today's we could go to back to the screen. Let me see. Yeah, so if today's session sparked ideas or questions and you'd like to dive deeper, whether it's get technical assistance, stay up to date on federal housing policy, or access to exclusive advocacy tools, I highly encourage you to consider becoming a member of National Income Housing Coalition. Membership is a great way to stay connected to the movement and amplify your voice on a national level. As a reminder, you'll be able to access the full recording to today's presentation and all previous Training Institute webinars directly on our Training Institute webpage. On the next slide, the same place where you registered. Be sure to check it off often for updates, tools, and future session announcements. And we're excited to share that more webinars are coming as part of the second trimester of the Training Institute. Each one is thoughtfully designed to strengthen your skills, leadership, and collective power as tenant leaders. So stay tuned and invite others to join this growing movement. I want to leave you with a quote that truly captures the spirit of today's session. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Alice Walker. You do have power, and civic engagement is one of the most powerful tools we have to transform our communities from the inside out. Until next time, keep organizing, keep growing, and keep believing. Thank you again, and we'll see you at the next session.